introducing what the Green New Deal is and kind of what's included in it?
Okay. Refer to my notes, make sure I don't miss anything. Yeah, so I think more than anything, it's a resolution that sets a vision of how we address this existential threat and existential crisis. There are very few actual policy details in HR 109, the House resolution introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but a lot of broad and ambitious vision. I think that's important. We'll talk about the specific visions are in there. But I think that's really important for a number of reasons, because when we think back of, at the great social movements in the long history of social movements, and we learn about them, we didn't start with the Voting Rights Act and have Dr. King sort of like marching through Selma holding up a bill that detailed every single policy that needed to change to undo voter suppression and the racist laws of the Jim Crow era, right? Instead, we had a vision, right? Dr. King and other leaders of that time were able to articulate in plain English and speak to the masses of people in this country and abroad in accessible, value-based language. And I think that's really what the strength of HR 109, the Green New Deal resolution is that it's speaking to people's values. So first and foremost, it calls for a rapid decarbonization of our energy sector, calling for net zero emissions from all energy production and consumption by 2030. It also calls for similar net zero emissions from the building sector by 2030. It calls for net zero transportation by 2035 and fully decarbonized and fossil fuel-free transportation by the year 2050. It calls for a massive federal jobs program in which anyone who is seeking employment in the green economy can obtain a job from the federal government. That's sort of like how it's based on the New Deal, based on the popular social and public works programs coming out of the original New Deal. I think critically different than the original New Deal is that this has a real focus on racial justice and aspects of a just transition, right? We know that the New Deal was one of the largest creators of wealth ever in this country's history, but we also know that people of color were largely and deliberately excluded from that wealth generation, primarily through practices of redlining. They were not eligible for the government subsidized loans that helped to create the middle class in the suburbs. That was the huge engine of wealth at the time. And so the Green New Deal does center those concerns. Not only does it guarantee the right to clean air and clean water for environmental justice and frontline communities, but it puts in visionary language so that the communities who are most directly impacted by our current energy system would be at the front of the line and would get direct economic benefits and ownership of renewable energy and the green economy. And it also provides jobs provisions, not just any jobs, but for fossil fuel workers, workers who are employed either directly by the fossil fuel industry or in indirect industries, it would provide comparable wage jobs. And that's critical because many of the jobs in the green economy actually are not at the pay scale of the middle class jobs in the fossil fuel sector. And in order to build the sort of sustained political support we need, that was a critical element to make sure that nobody was left behind. We're seeing right now what a fuel tax in Paris has done. It's triggered a very reactionary yellow vest movement that has real populist roots and is essentially threatening the future of climate legislation in Paris because it was a very neoliberal approach. It did not center economic justice within it. So I think the Green New Deal does genuinely try to do that through those provisions. And then it also includes Medicare for all. And I think that's important for a couple of different reasons. One, we've been at this whole climate legislation thing for decades now, and quite frankly, we haven't won, primarily because the masses of people in this country haven't seen it as an issue that directly impacts their lives. And I think by creating sort of a broad-based economic stimulus package in which concretely improves the economic conditions of working people, working class people throughout the country, that we can actually get the political support we need to pass climate legislation. I know many people think that including Medicare for All is actually a distraction and would serve the opposite function, but I think that's, quite frankly, a classist analysis. And I think that if we're trying to win over the opinions of the middle and upper classes of society, you know, that's not what we're talking about. I think the Green New Deal is a real populist vision that is inclusive and could build a kind of broad-based working class political support that I think is in line with the political moment we're in, where we see a demagogue like Trump who can say the right things to working class people and essentially dupe them into supporting him, but largely he's able to do that because of our neoliberal economic policies, where people see you know, both parties and the establishment of both parties not serving their interests. So I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I'm
There we go. Sounds good. You're on a roll, so didn't want to cut you off too soon. But so I think what's also really different about the Green New Deal is that we usually don't hear about resolutions. So how did this get into the mainstream? Why are we talking about it now? So Elias, and I'm sorry if how do you pronounce your name? I want to say it right.
Avaz.
Avaz. Okay, I'm so sorry. Want to get everyone's names right. But could you talk a little bit more about how this got into the mainstream and what you've been doing? And I heard you may have been arrested?
Yeah. Great.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, twice actually. Once in Pelosi's office, the others in McConnell's. But first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Matt because he said he was going to look at his notes to understand the Green New Deal, and I was watching him and he couldn't find the notes, and then he just went off and did a perfect explanation of that. So I think he deserves a round of applause for that. That was incredible. But yeah, so this is something that's very different because the Green New Deal specifically has been getting a lot of attention, and a lot of that is because of the Sunrise Movement. And I believe this is sponsored. Is this Rutgers Sunrise?
Co-sponsored.
Awesome, cool. And so this is a movement that's building up all around the country. We just started a hub up in Jersey City. There's one in Jersey Shore as well. And what's given the Green New Deal such unprecedented attention is the fact that people are getting involved. And that's something that's different, and that's something that I really want to see in politics in general moving forward. But when people start to get involved, you're going to start to see more ambitious solutions for the problems that we're facing, and that's exactly what's happening here. So the Sunrise Movement was actually, they started a while back. So before they got a lot of the press, they did a lot of planning and organizing and just movement building in general. So I was surprised when I went to the first sit-in, which was in Representative Pelosi's office, and this was back in December, and I just like saw it on a whim. I know that Representative Ocasio-Cortez had joined in one of the earlier protests. I was a huge fan of Representative Ocasio-Cortez. And I was, honestly, my biggest hope was like, I was just hoping that I would bump into her there, you know, because she, in the first sit-in, she actually stopped by, she joined the Sunrise Movement in their first demonstration, their first big demonstration, and that's what gave it a lot of press. So my intention was purely selfish. It was entirely, let me go see if I could be a part of this so I could bump into Ocasio-Cortez. But then I went there and I was expecting to walk into a room. So the way it works is they meet up at a church on the Sunday night, the night before the action, and then they give you a little training. They tell you exactly what's going to happen. They break it down into 3 levels, whether you want to be high risk, which is whether you want to risk arrest, whether you want to be medium risk, where you want to be close to the people that are risking arrest, where you have a chance of getting arrested, but you can also back out at the last minute. That's important. And then there's this low risk, which you end up staying in the hallway. There's no risk of arrest, and they work very closely with Capitol Police to make sure that those guys are able to get out before the arrests start to happen. So that, first of all, was very interesting that they had those options available. But the thing that shocked me the most is when I went to that training, I was expecting to be talked to and taught how we're going to do this by people that were much older than I was. But I was surprised because the people that were organizing this, the people that were running this action and that had planned this out so thoroughly and so comprehensively were people that were 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old, and 19 years old. So high schoolers, late high schoolers, early college. And so that in and of itself was, astounding to me because I remember where I was at that age and I was not planning a huge national sit-in. I wasn't doing anything related to politics, So that really hooked me in and that got me more interesting. And then I wanted to see okay, well, so they've got a really good plan, but let's see how well they can execute it. And the execution was better than the planning because they thought things down really well. They had us in the morning. So the sit-in that I first went to was about 1,000 people, which was a lot, coming from all over the country. And so in the morning, what they did was they broke us out into our groups based on where we were coming from. So a lot of people came from different states. I came from New Jersey, of course. And they had us go to our own representative's office. And in the morning, we were to talk to them about the Green New Deal and see if we can get their support for it and just try to rally some support within the House of Reps, within our own state. And then in the evening is when people came together to do this big action in Pelosi's office. And everything worked according to plan. They had their high-risk people that were inside the office that were making a lot of noise. They were telling stories. They were just really expressing emotion. That was really important. And that's something that captivates the media's attention, I just think it's very unprecedented because you don't see people that united taking these actions inside a sitting representative's office and speaking with such passion. And these aren't people that have years of experience, years of public speaking experience, years of training. These are young people. These are high schoolers. These are early college students. And so that in and of itself, again, is very powerful. Just that image of seeing this new generation getting so involved, getting so emotional, and speaking to these people in authority, these people in that position, and it kind of paints that picture. This is not just a random movement. This is saying we're the younger generation. We're just growing up, and we're about to inherit a planet that may not be in the same condition that it is right now. So it's not just a conversation about people getting together about some random niche, policy. This is saying we need to make sure that our generation is taken care of. And if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to take care of us, then we're going to come into your office and we're going to tell you exactly how we feel. And that's exactly what happened in Pelosi's office. And I think that's what catapulted this into the public spotlight, is creating that narrative of, this is our planet, we're the younger generation, this is the planet that we're going to inherit, and we're going to fight for it if you're not going to protect it. So I think that's what really brought it into the public spotlight. But then just to go on to talk about the whole experience, and a few of us from Rutgers actually went back after the December one to go into the second sit-in at McConnell's office, and I think they can even share that it was such an effortless experience. They had it really well planned out to the point where if you were interested in participating in the high-risk action and you didn't have the money, so you have to pay a $50 bail to get out of just being detained. And so if you didn't have that money, they had cash there. So you just walk up to them, say, I want to participate in this high-risk action, and they'll hand you $50 in cash, and they'll enable you to participate as long as you're not a minor. They don't want to cause more problems by having minors. Anyone who has, participated in these actions of civic disobedience multiple times, they don't want to put anyone that is prone to actually getting arrested and detained for a long period of time. They don't want to put them at risk. So anyone who is a first-timer, a second-timer, they provide you with the cash that you need to get out, and they just walk you through everything. They walk you you through, they have a lawyer there as well who talks about the implications of getting arrested. So it ends up being just like a slap on the wrist. It doesn't show up as a conviction, so that's something that a lot of people are concerned about. It does end up on your permanent record, but most jobs, because a lot of people are concerned about applying for jobs after getting arrested, most jobs ask you if you've been convicted of a crime. Since this is not a conviction, you do not have to answer yes to that. So they explain all these little things just so that they can make sure that everyone who wants to participate is comfortable. And then they kind of organize, they work with, the Capitol Police. They know the drill. They know that there's 3 strikes. The police will give you 3 warnings. The first 2 warnings, that's when you get the medium risk and the low risk people out of there. The 3rd strike, that's when people start getting arrested. And then the beautiful thing is when you're getting arrested, first of all, you're sitting down on the ground outside of the office with the rest of the people that are also getting arrested, which is always a lot of people, and they're singing your name. They're singing courage. I don't remember the whole song, but they're chanting, courage, have courage. They're chanting your name. So it's such a powerful and emotional experience for anyone involved.
Do you think that had an impact on Nancy Pelosi or on Mitch McConnell?
The sit-in itself?
Did they release any sort of statements after that, or?
Yeah, so I know Pelosi, after our sit-in, she actually set up a meeting with the leaders of the Sunrise Movement, so Varshini and her team, which was really effective. And then the second one, McConnell's sit-in, he ended up pushing back the vote on the Green New Deal, which was also really effective. So yes, it was.
Cool.
Yeah.
So kind of like looking back at our sequence of events and big picture, we have the IPCC report, which kind of called for politicians to take action. Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey have answered that with this resolution to serve as a vision for what we could do. How did this resolution actually reach the mainstream media? Different organizing efforts and protests, and really getting our highest leaders in Congress to take a look at this and for the media to take a look too. And a lot of this has been very controversial, and you can look at both sides of the Green New Deal. Recognizing our bias, I know so far we seem to be very supportive of the Green New Deal, but I definitely encourage everybody to really consider different sides of things and how we can make our policies better. But looking kind of back at the broader implications of things, I'm really interested in Dr. Schwam, what your perspective as a sociologist is on the climate movement in general and especially on the Green New Deal. If that's too big of a question, we can narrow it down a little bit too.
I'm thinking.
Okay, no problem.
We've seen generally, this coincides, I think the kind of events that you're talking about have coincided with broader public opinion.
Can you hold the mic closer to you?
Okay. Yes, there we go. Sorry, not a mic person. So the kind of trajectory of the Green New Deal and this awareness follows kind of general public opinion in America, where after kind of a real dip in 2008 of kind of concern and belief in climate change, it's climbed back up, and that's within both parties, although Republicans are always, significantly lower on those levels. And so finally this year, reaching kind of past the dip levels and kind of to the highest levels it has been. So as that kind of goes forward, we're seeing that, and we've also, something that was really amazing is kind of all the time that I've studied climate change public opinion, it's always been a bottom issue. So people will say they're concerned, but then when you ask kind of more, so like rank your top issues, and on, even if you just do the environment, water quality, air quality, these things come above, and then there's climate. And then even when you go to broader issues, so national security, economic growth, these kinds of things, right? Climate's way at the bottom, and it's finally kind of come up and is getting, in some surveys, kind of, people are more concerned about this than economic growth, right? Which is often kind of a swing. When you're getting economic growth, then people start to kind of will be concerned with environmental regulation, and then when you get kind of recession, they flip again, or they flip. But so, that's good. You asked about social implications.
Yeah, I guess there's been a lot of debate in like the public sphere about the Green New Deal. What's been kind of the social implications of this proposal? Or if you want to keep talking about your research and your perspective on climate change. that
Here's
works
just
too.
the social implications as far as for.
I guess, is this politically feasible? Is it socially acceptable by the majority of people? We're in a fairly liberal bubble at Rutgers, so kind of what has been the broader reception of this?
Okay, sorry.
No, that was my bad.
So I don't know if I've seen any kind of like real Green New Deal response studies because it's such a short time, besides kind of polls and things. But I do think that it's had so there's certainly an argument for how the Green New Deal addresses issues, it's more politically feasible because it addresses these issues of unfairness and that you see with things like carbon taxes or other kinds of the policies that have been discussed. So that's one side. On the other hand, there's certainly kind of, like in the clip you showed, climate change has become an incredibly polarizing issue since the 1990s, and the Green New Deal didn't do anything to decrease that polarization or bridge parties or anything. So I think this is about hopefully mobilizing a cross-sector of people around climate change policy, but I think the politics of kind of the parties will remain the same.
Okay, so maybe there's a little bit of hope for it, and if we are able to pass like some portions of it, then that would be definitely a step in the right direction towards helping mitigate our climate crisis, although I think we do need more immediate action than our politicians are going to get us.
Can I add one quick point?
Of course.
So yeah, like most progressive policies, we're not going to pass a Green New Deal with this Congress. Princeton University did a study 2 years ago that shows that our United States government actually works as an oligarchy. The interests of the ruling class get passed while the interests of the majority of working people do not even get consideration, right? We know that dark money and the fossil fuel industry and the healthcare industry and pharmaceuticals and military industrial complex, these are the special interests that are ruling our life. They're the ones that fund those media outlets who try to frame the debate as, this is about banning hamburgers and milkshakes and about this divisive left and right rhetoric. But those of us who are around for the Occupy movement and social movements since that time, whether it be teacher strikes in West Virginia and other parts of the rural South, or whether it be fights against pipelines in Texas, where you have Tea Party Republicans and leftist anarchists on the same front line protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. This is no longer about left and right. We need to frame the debate as this is about the 99%, the majority of the people on this planet who want to have a future life, who want clean water, a decent job, health care, and be able to send their kids to school and have some sense that their kids are going to be able to carve out a life on this planet, versus the 1%. And really it's the 0.01% that owns these major fossil fuel corporations whose valuation is based on the reserves that we simply cannot burn if we want to avoid climate catastrophe. So we just need to get out of this whole left versus right and really build a populist agenda that is about meeting the needs of the masses of working people in this country. And I think we're well on the way to doing that with the vision that's been laid out and how it's really comprehensive and doesn't leave anyone behind.
I think that's really one of the things that I love about the Green New Deal. So environmental justice has been a field for decades, but it hasn't really come into our quote unquote mainstream conversation until more recently. So our our Earth Week this year is actually has a running theme of climate justice, because we really want to center those conversations about where social, economic, and environmental issues overlap. So one of those things that seemed kind of random in the Green New Deal was health. Why is healthcare in there? Because people's health and the environment, the health of the environment are actually very tied together. So I was wondering if Matt could talk a little bit about Medicare for All and how that relates to the Green New Deal. Other Matt. We got two.
Got a couple notes here. First of all, thank you everyone for coming. For those who don't know me, my name is Matt Himmelfarb. I graduated last year from Rutgers School of Nursing here in New Brunswick. And right now I work as a psychiatric nurse in particular. For those who may not be too familiar with that specialty, basically I work with people suffering from mental illness, whether it be depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And I also work with patients going through detox and suffering from addiction, most prominently alcohol and opioids. Frankly, when I was preparing my remarks for today, I could probably do a whole lecture about this topic, and so I wasn't quite sure what to hone in on. But naturally, I thought I'd start out by discussing the state of behavioral health care in America today. 2018 marked the third straight year that life expectancy declined in the United States. And this decline, this consistent decline in life expectancy, is driven overwhelmingly by two factors: rising suicide rate, as well as a dramatic increase in drug overdoses. In fact, since 1999, the suicide rate in the US has increased by 25%. Over the last decade, meanwhile, the teen and adolescent suicide rate has gone up 70%. Now, in spite of all this, about 40% of people suffering from severe mental illness don't receive any psychiatric care. In fact, 50% of people that committed suicide never even received a diagnosis. Only 30% of people suffering from opioid abuse disorder got any treatment whatsoever. And the overwhelming number one reason, the number one barrier to receiving psychiatric care is simply that people can't afford it. And so, but this is just, of course, symptomatic of our barbaric, amoral, and dysfunctional healthcare system as a whole. And so you guys have probably heard all the numbers. 30 million people in this country lack health insurance. Now, what does this mean in the most practical sense? Well, they've done studies, and it shows that for every 830 people that lack health insurance, one of those people will unnecessarily die. And so, over the course of the next decade, if we don't address this issue, nearly 500,000 people who would otherwise be alive, if only for having health insurance, will die. But aside from the people that lack health insurance, something that sometimes gets neglected in this discussion, 40 million people are underinsured, meaning they technically have health insurance, yet their deductibles and their copays are so high, they can hardly, if at all, afford to use it. And this is not a negligible amount of people, I gotta emphasize. That 40 million, that's nearly half of the amount of people that have private health insurance, period. And so how does this work? Well,
I believe there's 160 million people that have private insurance, so 40 wouldn't be half of that.
I'll have to double check the statistics on that. But nevertheless, it's a very high amount of people in any case. And so how does this work in practice? Well, the average deductible in the US right now is about $2,700. Now keep in mind, nearly 4 in 10 Americans don't have enough savings to even cover an $1,000 emergency. Nearly half of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 1 in 5 people can't afford to fill the prescriptions that they're provided. And not to mention, about now that we're 5 years after the Affordable Care Act was passed, it's still estimated that 500,000 people a year are bankrupted by healthcare costs. It is overwhelmingly the #1 driver of bankruptcy in the United States. And that doesn't even touch upon the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are forced to sell their home, their car, cut back on basic necessities just to afford medical care. And so I bring those particular statistics up in light of the fact that one of the basic tenets of Medicare for All is that care should be free at the cost at the point of service. And I emphasize this because if we give up on that demand, it's not merely a minor concession, but in fact, it is a matter of life and death for thousands, if not millions of people. And so aside from all that, very uplifting, I know, so I wanted to address a few of the arguments against Medicare for All that you're most likely to encounter. And the first question I guess comes to everyone's mind is, well, how are you going to pay for it? And
they're going to pay for something that's cheaper?
that's a short way of putting it, yes, but you are correct, sir. But so some of you might remember last summer, there was a study that came out from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. It's a libertarian group of economists, funded by the Koch brothers, in fact. And they found that Medicare for All would cost about $50 trillion over the next decade. So that was kind of the headline you tended to see that came out of this study. But in fact, if we continue on our current trajectory, total health expenditures in the US will be $60 trillion. And so I want everyone to really kind of dwell on what that means. Essentially, we can eliminate the entire population of uninsured people, underinsured people, medical bankruptcy, give everyone permanent, comprehensive benefits, including dental and vision and psychiatric care, and save $1 trillion a year in the process. Another thing I'd like to touch on, one of the other criticisms you'll hear all the time about single payer is, well, those long waiting lines and the death panels and whatnot. And it is true, some countries that have single payer have longer waiting times than we do. Other countries, in fact, have less. It's dependent on a lot of factors, the money spent. It's also highly dependent on what specific service you're talking about. But in fact, I find this to be, the waiting line statistic, to be a very kind of narrow and misleading stat. Because what we should really be looking at is access to care. And when you use this particular metric, the US is way towards the bottom among Western nations. And the reason for this is, of course, is that waiting line statistic isn't counting all the people in the US whose waiting time is infinite because they can't afford care. And last but not least, another argument I've been hearing lately is, well, when you tell people about single payer and you poll them, and then you tell them they're gonna lose their current health insurance, support drops. You're gonna take away health care from 160 million people all at once. But of course, I also find this to be very incomplete and misleading criticism as well. Because in fact, 30% of people that have employer-provided health care are not on the same plan next year. Even those people on Medicaid, 40% of them face a spell of uninsurance within the next year. Millions of people every year are getting kicked off their health insurance regardless. So, in fact, Medicare for All is the solution to this problem, because you'll be promised the same comprehensive set of health care. It's permanent, it's not dependent on your job or any other life circumstances. And so, to kind of close things out, I don't know, maybe some of you find it odd that I kind of dive into the weeds on a few of these subjects and spill a lot of statistics. But I wanted to talk about these things in particular because, as they say, the overtime window continues to shift left and single payer becomes an increasingly mainstream and viable policy. At the same time, this is undoubtedly going to be matched by powerful entrenched interests on the other side, that have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And these people have the financial resources to fight this, and they are going to throw every criticism at the book at us. And I think we need to be prepared to grapple with that. And the fact is, the political realities, as much as we might fight, we may not quite get 100% Medicare for all. But I did want to emphasize the enormity of this struggle and the importance of giving it all we got, because, like I said, it really is just a matter of life and death to so many people.
Thank you all. So I think what really kind of connects everything here from what our speakers have been discussing is that, one, the health of our planet is in dire circumstances. The health of our people is in dire circumstances. And if you save one without the other, what's the point? And our status quo is just not going to do. So what we need right now is change. We need a vision, and I think so far the Green New Deal is one of those things that's putting out a vision and seeing like, hey, what can we do from here? What solutions are there? And kind of guiding our conversation and changing the conversations that we're having. It's made it into the mainstream, and we wouldn't be having these discussions right now if it wasn't for that. So we have about 10-15 minutes left, so I want to open it up for questions. I saw her hand first, and then I'll go to you.
Okay, my question has to do with the, we had a Sunrise Jersey Shore meeting last night, and we brought up the idea of, one of the things that I hear constantly, and I too was in Washington with a lot of the kids from the shore area, is the fact that the Green New Deal promises a wage, a guaranteed wage. Now, someone said yesterday that that's not part of the resolution anymore, because one of the things that keeps floating around is the fact that people are not happy with somebody getting, it's like the old welfare story, if you're old enough to remember those kinds of things, where somebody's getting something for nothing in terms of a guaranteed wage, and that those wages are geared towards supporting those fossil fuel workers that are going to be displaced. What's the story on the guaranteed wage?
Well, so I think the guaranteed wage ties into the federal jobs guarantee. And I think the implication behind that, or the thought behind that is, first of all, if someone in this country wants a job, they should have a job. because people want to work, people inherently want to work, so if they are seeking that sort of employment, they should have access to that. And I think just broadly to encompass things is we need to create minimum standards in this country. I know Bernie Sanders consistently says that America is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. So for us to not have these minimum standards of everyone having access to health care, for anyone who wants a job to have access to a job, to everyone to be paid a fair wage that is adjusted to inflation, so that everyone has these minimum standards of living, that's so important, especially in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. So we can't continue to allow income inequality to persist when there's so much wealth in this country. Yeah.
I understand
Yeah.
income inequality. My question is that tenet in the resolution?
Yes.
Is there a guaranteed wage
Yeah.
in,
The federal job guarantee is at a living, dignified wage. And
for doing what?
for anyone who wants to work in the green economy. As I said,
They have to be
resolution
working
is
though.
short on-
They have to be working though, right?
Yeah,
Right, they don't get paid for not working, right?
Right.
right.
And that's what the misconception is out there in terms of how people understand it, because they hear a guaranteed wage and they think that people are getting welfare, and even if they don't have a job.
Well, to be clear, people who lose their jobs because their industries are being phased out would get direct financial assistance while they're retraining and repurposing.
But it's like
themselves.
unemployment. Why don't they call it unemployment?
Yeah.
I mean,
They frame it as the federal jobs guarantee.
and I encourage anybody that wants change, you've got to go to your representatives' offices and insist that they listen. Frank Pallone, I understand, is having a town hall in Rutgers today. Every one of you students need to go there and let him know how you feel.
Jam on it.
You're stealing my thunder. We're trying to invite you 45 so we can get you all to the town hall.
While you're handing off that mic, I want to answer or touch to you can hand it off, to your earlier question about the social implications of the Green New Deal and these movements. That's really important. We need to make it the norm for these movements to exist, and that's what the Sunrise Movement is doing. That's what this Medicare for All movement is doing. So we need to get more people out, and that's how we're actually going to make these happen. It's not whether we can do it, it's if we have the ability, if we go out and make it happen. That's how it's going to work.
All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Sid Madison. I've been around for a while as a climate activist, and my second goal is to be a social activist. And if you agree that those are my priorities, Matt, would you shake your head yes or no? Are my priorities climate first and social second?
That's what you say, Sid.
Okay, thank you. Well, I met Matt in May of 2012 when we both were lobbying about climate after the climate ride. But my first arrest was in 2011. I've been arrested 4 times, so I feel I've paid my time and I can stand up and talk to you. But I'm going to make it real short. I believe the direction that I'm going to ask the question about, and it emphasizes climate before all the social goals that have been mentioned here, all of which I agree need to be addressed. But climate has to come first. And I'm only going to mention one of the sources of that I saw that emphasizes this. There was an editorial in the Washington Post, which is not a what you would call a out of line or backwards institution. They're kind of on the liberal side, okay? And basically,
Owned by Jeff Bezos, who's the third wealthiest man in the world.
yeah.
He's got interest. He doesn't pay taxes, but go ahead.
Okay, so you've all given one side of the argument. I want you to explain why several groups, Fox and Washington Post, etc., are saying we need to make sure we deal with the climate issue first and the social issues afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, my whole theory is when we have the corporate media essentially the mouthpiece for the industries that we have to shut down if we're going to have a future on this planet, when they start attacking our proposals, that means we're on the right track. So I see those op-eds as actually a sign of encouragement. We've tried to pass standalone climate policy since the historic failure of the 1994 Kyoto Protocol. It simply is not going to work. You're never going to yoke together a mass coalition of a majority of working Americans who are just going to support standalone climate legislation. So we have nothing to lose by including a broad-based progressive vision that we need to actually change the makeup of Congress. We will never pass climate legislation through this Congress. It's not going to happen. Even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who just introduced the Green New Deal, voted in favor of a bill to send our taxpayer dollars to Europe to build intake facilities so we can ship fracked gas, liquefied natural gas, overseas to Europe. So even the most progressive, most dynamic woman in Congress in my lifetime is still voting for the fossil fuel industry agenda. So it's just not going to happen. We need to remake Congress. We need the political revolution that AOC talks about, that Bernie talks about. Like, I'm not questioning that AOC is with us in her heart, but she's playing the game. She has to. If she doesn't give certain votes to leadership and to special interests, they will remove her from office. They will spend whatever it takes to get her out. And so that's what we're up against. We need to create a coalition, not just to pass a single bill, but to change the entire makeup of our democracy so that the kinds of policies, the bold policy responses that we need to address the climate crisis can actually become law.
So who is that? Who is that? Who is the Bill Gates of this movement? Who is speaking their language? I only say that because you're talking about changing a game, and you said AOC is playing the game, because there is a game. So are we, as the people who are leading the movements, are we the people, the NRDC and the Bill Gateses that are funding the lobbyists? Like, how does that game change? I love everything you're saying. I'm totally on board. But who's changing the game?
So Erica Chenoweth published a study 4 years ago that shows that in the history of nonviolent revolutions, from overthrowing dictators in Serbia to Indian independence to the civil rights movement, is that if social movements are able to activate 3.5% of the population, not a majority, 3.5%, if they become active on an issue and do what this young man is courageously doing, and thousands of other young people in this country and millions across the world are doing, walking out of school, striking at their workplaces, shutting down the halls of government, disrupting business as usual, if 3.5% of us agree that we want a life on this planet and agree to take those risks and make that commitment, that's how this works.
Thank you.
So,
And I want to touch to your...
the same position that you just made, that 3.5%, and you address climate issues first.
Okay, we're going
Well-
to move on to the
Saying.
next question. One comment, I think that we need to address things at the same time because there are social issues that are impacting climate change. When you make sure that women have an equal wage, they actually help support initiatives that are supporting our climate. That's proven. There's been books on that. I think Dr. Pamela McElwee has actually written a book on climate change and gender equality. So there's a lot of examples of social issues that when addressed in conjunction with climate actually benefit both at the same time. So your hand first and then Adila.
You know me, Justin O'Hay. So I have a quick comment before. So I'm a social worker. I've worked in mental health for 20 plus years. I totally respect what you're doing right now. So first a comment, it's really hard to mobilize people when they're poor and they can't free themselves from work. So that's one big piece. If you don't have the money to actually get out and do things, if you don't have you can't mobilize. So part of the reason why we're dealing with this huge wealth gap is to essentially politically demobilize and deactivate people from being able to actually stand up for their rights. Aside from it, so you brought something up very interesting, Matt, and I don't even know if this is a question or food for thought. The war machine. So when we think about this issue with the Green New Deal, and I think about the military-industrial complex, so much of it seems directly dependent upon the fossil fuel industry. For some reason, our jets fly off of jet fuel. Everything seems to run off of some sort of petrochemical. It makes me wonder if the Pentagon itself might even be working against some of this because of the fact that so much of our war machine is dependent upon the fossil fuel industry. It just makes me think, and also that the US military is the largest polluter in the world on top of that. And most people don't realize that you know, us dropping bombs and flying, putting tanks and all these ships and things flying around destroys the environment. So it just makes me wonder if some element of this movement could be almost mobilized towards that end. I know that that's a big risk, the anti-war movement that's been like on life support for a long time. But I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts regarding kind of where I'm getting at when I speak on this?
I mean, I don't have all of the answers. I do know that it's bigger than the military-industrial complex. We're seeing the FBI training counter insurgency, you know, to stifle protest against the Keystone XL pipeline, right? So it's the militarized police state and the military-industrial complex who are both clearly in bed with the ruling class and do not want to see the fossil fuel industry and all of the wealth that generates for all of them and their rich friends go away, right? They want to milk that cow for another 20, 30 years, the rest of us and all life on this planet be damned. So, I mean, this is bigger than just our normal policy fights, right? We have to think differently, we have to act differently, we have to throw all of our old assumptions out the window, and I wish I had the answer, but
Something worth thought.
yeah.
And I think, you know, what Matt here said earlier is about, you know, shifting the Overton window to the left. I think that's exactly what we're doing. And if we keep doing this, if we keep at this, if we get that 3.5% involved, we can really make a lot of change regarding a lot of these issues. I think a lot of people know that this is a problem, and you know that you were talking about the anti-war movement. I think one thing that's really important with Sunrise Movement is they're all about working with other coalitions. So if we have this movement building in Sunrise where a lot of people are getting involved, people that weren't ordinarily involved are starting to speak up, that is just going to build into more of these things. So that's when we can start connecting with these movements and bring more attention to them. And just short term, if you don't know already, Mike Gravel is trying to get on the debate stage to talk about the military-industrial complex. You just have to give him $1 on Act Blue. He needs 65,000 donations so that he can talk about it on the debate stage in front of a national audience. So if you haven't done that already, make sure you give him $1.
What's his name?
Mike Gravel. He's running.
Apple literally spelled the same way as
Yeah. He's running for president. He doesn't have any intentions of winning. He just wants to get on the debate stage
Well,
to
if you
talk.
got $20, do $21 donations to him so you can jack up the numbers.
There you go. Do it. Make sure these voices are being heard. That's what's important.
Hi, my name is Adil Ahmed. So first off, thank you all of you for coming out tonight to come speak before us. I know it's a Tuesday night, so thank you for making time for that. The point was brought up that this is not a left or right issue. This is word. Okay, awesome. So a point was mentioned that this is not a left or a right issue. You know, this is a forward thing. But however, majority of the conversation that revolves around the Green New Deal is, let's be honest, done with the left. And I feel like that especially a lot of folks on the right, you know, folks in the Midwest, folks in the South, those are a lot of people who would especially, those are the people who would especially be impacted by the Green New Deal if that gets through. You know, those are the people that would especially be impacted by climate change. Damn it, man. So really my question to you is that how, well, if not you, but like how can like environmental activists, how can organizers for the Green New Deal work to cater this message of the movement to folks in the Midwest, to folks in the South, who already have a cynical view of people on the left, and even a cynical view for what is termed as environmental justice, because to them, you know, wind energy, solar energy doesn't matter much to them. To them, they just turn on Fox News and think that AOC and the Green New Deal is taking their hamburgers away. So how can we enlighten those people in those communities and really get them on board on our movement? Thank you.
I'm going to keep plugging the Sunrise Movement here because I think what they're doing is great. But I think that one thing that's important is in order to get rid of this left versus right conversation is to have people that are close to you, people that you don't talk politics about with. if that person talks to you, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, and says, like, these are issues that are important to you or important to them, that's when you can have that conversation without the Republican or Democratic moniker attached to it. So if we continue to build this movement, I think I'm very optimistic that there are people in those states, in those areas that are affected, and there are members of those communities that believe that the Green New Deal is the right path to take, and they have friends in their community that don't believe that. So those are the people that we want to mobilize, because they can talk sense into their friends, they can talk sense into their communities, and that's the only way we're going to get the message across to them, because as Matt here was saying, you know, there's a lot of investment. The corporate media is putting a lot of information in front of people's faces that still is not supportive of the Green New Deal in a lot of senses. So it's not just Fox News doing this now, but it's also CNN, MSNBC at some points as well doing this. So the only way you can really spread this message is through people on the ground, and the way we can do that is by continuing to build on these movements and to get actual people that are on the ground involved in spreading the word.
The only thing I would add is, like, we have two great spokespeople for this movement, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. I'm convinced that the reason why the establishment Democrats and Republicans are attacking AOC is because she actually knows how to speak to the majority of working people, regardless of their party affiliation, or whether they're in the South or North, by talking about things like clean water, health care, a decent future for their kids, and a livable wage job. And Bernie's done the same thing for his entire decade. So I think we have models of people who have, and we saw what happened to Sanders, right, with the DNC and the historic torpedoing of his campaign. So, you know, there's a reason why there's a lot of political opposition to that sort of progressive populist politics, is because it's popular, people like it, and it crosses party divides.
And just to add to what you two were saying, I also think this is where the things in the Green New Deal that aren't directly related to the environment really play a very important role, because we're not necessarily going to mobilize everyone just on the environmental issues. But the fact is, things like higher taxes on the rich and wealth redistribution and universal health care, they poll incredibly well, generally speaking. If you poll even registered Republicans on these issues, the polling's about 50-50 often. So on these populist bread and butter issues, I think we're on the popular side, so to speak. Obviously, there's other things that motivate people's voting behavior, so I don't know if it's a silver bullet, but I think it's something that we should really emphasize and will work in our favor.
Dr. Schwab?
Can say something to this. I'm new here, learning about the new Green Deal more, but the Green New Deal. I have been, worked on climate change, public opinion, and looked a lot at just more how do you talk to people about climate change, right? And people have always asked this, and I think you guys are definitely, on the same track as people have been looking at this, and that talk to people about, don't open a conversation with climate change, right? But talk to them about what they value and what's important to them, and understand, what the big things in their life are, and then it's pretty likely climate change impacts those things, right? Oh, you like boating? Oh, well, boating will change, right? You like fishing? Okay, and that kind of coming at it that way. And then also, I think you guys are speaking to, that a lot of these policies can benefit people. You can wipe out climate change and talk about having wind in the Midwest, and that's benefited a lot of people, and farmers and ranchers and things like that, and whether they believe in climate change or not. And so a lot of these policies, again, can advance what they value.
I think the discussions and the solutions also depend based on each individual and also based on different regions. So like in the film we showed before, Texas, for example, they were about to put in, I think it was like 17 new power plants, and then somebody spoke up and said, hey, these 17 new power plants would take up X amount of water. We already don't have enough water to drink. And then all of a sudden, they put up wind and solar everywhere. So if you figure out like what individual people care about, what stories relate to them, and what stories relate to their geographical area, not only can you help get them at the table for a conversation, you can also help develop a solution that's specific to that area. And it is 8:55, so if you're planning to be on time for the Cologne Town Hall, you might want to head over there now. If you want to stay for questions, you guys okay with a couple more questions if people have them, or is everyone heading out? One more question? Yeah. Last question, and then group walk over to Cologne.
Okay, so my name is Chris. I just had like a quick logistical question for the Matt all the way on the right, not Matt Himmelfarb. So you were saying in the Green New Deal resolution that it plans to, for the energy industry to have net zero emissions by 2030. I just wanted to know exactly like what that means. Does that mean net zero in terms of increasing CO2 emissions, or net zero as in like all the CO2 that we're emitting is absorbed by like trees and water? I just didn't really.
Yeah, I want to answer that question. I also want to ask someone from Sunrise, is there a goal to go over to the Cologne event and like all raise our hands and ask, if one of us gets picked, ask him if he's going to support a Green New Deal or stop taking fossil fuel money?
I'd say yes, that and Medicare for almost like.
Yeah, okay.
You guys need to do that, we've already done that.
Sure. So for any of us who are going over, let's all raise our hands and agree to ask that question.
Are they allowing non-students there?
Technically not, but they don't have anyone to stop you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, unless you want to keep it, but I think they get that.
But you know, when you
Let's take a group picture first, actually.
Yeah, and just to answer that question,